The Turkish military finds itself on the defensive yet again over an alleged plot against the ruling AK party. But who's undermining whom? Is the army just trying to make the government look Islamist, or is Turkey's secular order truly being threatened by its own government? The military, the Islamists, and the battle for secular Turkey. This is Inside Story. Hello there, I'm Kamal Santamaria. You know, when Turkey is in the news, it is almost always for the same reason, a plot or a threat, ultimately a fear that the country's secular system is being undermined. And so it's happened again, this time a report in a Turkish newspaper which claims to have a document outlining how the army planned to discredit the ruling party and stop it from allegedly implementing an Islamic state. Now, the government itself has started an investigation into the allegations and the document, stirring up the same old issue of whether secularism is truly under threat in Turkey. Bethan Howe has more.
Turkey, a country at the border of Europe and Asia. Its population is mainly Muslim, but the state is secular, and that can prove a volatile mix in politics. Last week, the Turkish newspaper Taraf claimed it had access to a document that showed military officers were plotting to discredit the ruling AK party. The document supposedly lays out plans to break support for the AK party by creating divisions within it, as well as planting weapons in the houses of members of an influential Islamic group to suggest they were involved in militant activities. Both the military and the government are investigating the allegations. Turkish Prime Minister Tayyip Erdogan has asked for a swift conclusion to the inquiries.
We cannot stand by helplessly in front of these attempts that are threatening our democracy. It's everybody's duty, civilians and military, to stand up to these vicious plans.
The AKP has been accused of being anti-secular and attempting to turn Turkey into an Islamic state, a charge its leaders deny. The military have traditionally been considered the guardians of this secular state and have participated in several political coups. But in April, Army Chief General Ilker Bazbug spoke of his support for the government and democracy.
As the Turkish military forces, we will remain respectful of democracy, democratic regime, and to the laws that prevail in our country. Therefore, anyone who does not abide by these principles has no place in the military.
The endorsement was considered a first for a military commander and signalled a shift in the military's involvement with the country's politics. The investigation follows allegations of other plots against the ruling AK party. Scores of people have been arrested and detained since 2007 as part of a government inquiry into the ultra-nationalist Ergenekon network. They've been accused of plotting attacks to provoke another military coup. The authenticity of the plot outlined in the Taraf report is being questioned. Government prosecutors say they are looking for the original document for forensic examination, as it could be a forgery. Whether real or fake, despite the military's attempts to take a back seat in the country's rule, the allegations have brought it back into Turkish politics once again. Bethan Howe for Inside Story.
Right, lots to talk about, so let's bring in our guests to do just that. Retired Brigadier General Haldun Solmaz. He is in Izmir for us. Over in Istanbul is Abdul Hamid Bilci. He's a columnist and head of the Cihan news agency. And rounding out our panel in London is Fatih Halkuri. He's a Turkish affairs expert in the European programme at Chatham House. Gentlemen, thank you for your time. Thank you for joining us on Inside Story. Let's deal with this plot, this alleged plot. First of all, Haldun Solmaz, I'll come to you. In your opinion, do you think it's a real threat? Does it even sound credible to you as a former army man yourself?
You mean a threat to Turkish democracy, or a threat to army's credibility, or a threat to Turkish government?
Well, let's try a whole lot of them. Let's first of all say this actual plot. Does the actual plot sound like a credible idea that it could have been planned within the army?
No, to be honest with you, if somebody within the army or outside the army thought such a thing, and created such a document, even in a draft form, it's a stupid idea. I mean, in 2009, even in Turkey, where democracy is not in a perfect level, it's not something plausible.
But it could have
I
been.
doubt it.
It could have been, though. I mean, anything could happen, but it could have been cooked up at a lower level without direction from above, if you want to say a rogue element within it. It's interesting that this comes out with such force in the newspaper like this.
Of course, it's not impossible that that's possible. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of project officers within the army. So any one of them could, may have entertained the idea of drafting such a plan.
But as far as it happening
it's
officially, of course, but as far your view is that as far as it happening, quote unquote, officially, you don't think the army's capable of that?
No, that's beyond doubt. And as a matter of fact, the chief of the army himself has made it crystal clear that he's never directed such a study or plan. Let's
go to Abdul Hamid in Istanbul. Despite what we've heard there from Haldan Salmazturk, the fact is this is going forward. Prime Minister Erdogan has met the army chief, but even after that meeting, it's still pressing forward. He wants to go through some sort of military prosecution. So you think of that phrase, where there's smoke, there could be fire.
I guess if he was satisfied enough, the party would not file the case and would not bring the case to the court. It seems that there are some ambiguities about the problem, about the allegation. So AK Party filed yesterday against the plot to the party. But still we are debating, of course, if the document is authentic or forged. But if we did not have that kind of documents before, if it was an first time we faced such a document, it would be appropriate to doubt about the authenticity of the document before debating if that fits to democratic environment or not. But in that case, unfortunately, we are having such documents which are not denied by the military. So even in that document, which is signed by a colonel who is on duty colonel, but this same person had another signature on another document which tried to discredit civil society, some businessmen, some journalists. So, I mean, if it seems it's a continuation of a problem that some part of the army, let's say that much for the time being, is not happy with the democratic credentials of Turkey or the aspiration of Turkish people for a full-fledged democracy.
And this is the thing, as you say, it's a continuation of a problem. These types of things simply keep happening in Turkey. I wonder, does it shake people's faith in the army at all? Do they start to doubt the army? Because I know the army is very much held up as a bastion of secularism and a bastion of Turkishness. Does it affect people's view of the army?
In general, Turkish people have a very good feeling and support for the army, as much as it does its own function, the real function of securing Turkish borders and Turkish state. But when it comes to undermining Turkish democracy, of course, Turkish people attitude is seen in the election results. There has been similar intervention in 2007 on the 27th of April on the process of presidential elections, and people showed how they feel in the following election in 22nd of July. So I can't say that people are happy. I mean, the majority of Turkish people are happy with those kind of intervention by the military to Turkish democracy. But I guess this is a very important point of concern for the army itself, that they should question if those attempts continue, how at the end it will change the perception of Turkish society, because Turkish army is not a professional army and it's a conscript army. So people are sending their children to the military. So it is a very important problem for the image of the army itself. And so I guess General Başbuğ, Chief of Staff, always says that this happened, if it is true, if the document is authentic, it is not under their order. So it is something to blame on some colonel, some people, some marginal sections of the army. But if it is something that is done by the order of the higher levels of Turkish military, it would be a bigger problem, of course, for the image.
It could be indeed. Let's widen the conversation out a bit, and we'll do that with Fadi Hakura, who's in London for us. The point I've kind of been building to at this point in the show is what I'm going to call the wider threats in Turkey, and I'm using the word threat kind of loosely because if we deal with the AK party first, it's been in power since 2002. 7 years it's been in power. Surely, if it wanted to truly shake up the secular system in Turkey, and if it wanted to turn Turkey into an Islamist state or anything like that, surely it would have done it by now.
We have to look at the AKP party or the AKP government in terms of two phases in power. During its first term of government, it was a reformist, pro-European Union party. But since the general elections of 2007, July 2007, it has become an increasingly populist, one can even say Islamist party. Not in terms of trying to overturn the system, because I don't think they can do that, simply because the Turkish public opinion would not accept it, but trying to use soft pressure, across society, it seems, for example, to restrict alcohol, interaction between men and women. One can see that pressure. There was a study, for example, done by a very credible academic in Turkey called Binnaz Toprak, and very credible. She's a very credible, neutral or very moderate academic. And she found in her study that strong evidence of soft pressure being applied by the government and some of its religious supporters in trying to impose some kind of conservative social morality across Turkey. So one has to distinguish between the first-term AKP government, which was pro-reform, and the current AKP government, which is more populist and less reformist.
And yet, the army has, I think we can fairly say this, in the last few years, backed off a little bit. There is always this fear, it seems, with Turkish society that the army, the strong army, could step in at any moment whenever it wants to, but it hasn't. Even though, as you're saying, there is this sort of soft movement towards more Islamic ideals.
The Turkish military prides itself very strongly that it is an institution close to the Turkish public, and it cares very strongly about the opinions in Turkish society. So Turkish society is changing. Yes, they do hold the military in high esteem. Opinion polls indicate that 80 to 90% of Turks regard the military as the most trusted institution in the country, but increasingly also the Turkish public do not want to see the military interfering in politics, directly or indirectly. So it would be wise for the military to, so the military has understood this issue and increasingly now is trying to withdraw from politics, at least from frontline politics.
Okay, so seeing as we're talking about the military now, I think we should focus on it a little bit more, especially for our viewers, because there is a reason why even a hint of the Turkish military being up to something creates a level of anxiety within political circles. That reason is history. And it goes back all the way to 1923 when Mustafa Kemal Atatürk founded the modern secular Republic of Turkey. And even though the founder himself insisted on separating the military from politics, the Turkish military perceives itself, as we've mentioned, as we've talked about, as perhaps the guardian of Kemalism, the official state ideology which sought to create a modern, democratic and, importantly, secular nation-state. Guided by that belief, the military, this is the point you're making, the military has overthrown the government on several occasions. In fact, it's happened once every decade since the 1960s. Each time the country was crippled by an unstable political situation, social unrest and ailing economy. The most recent one, 1997, Necmettin Erbakan, an Islamic-oriented prime minister, was pressured by the military. He stepped down. Reason enough, perhaps, for the current Prime Minister, that man, Tayyip Erdogan, to be looking over his shoulder every now and then. Let's go back to Haldun Salmaz-Türk in Izmir and pick up on a point I made to Fadi Hakura about, well, I said to him that, you know, if the AK party had wanted to overthrow secularism, it could have done it by now. Similarly, if the army had wanted to do something, if the army really saw this AK party and this AK government as a threat, surely it would have done something about it by now, if we judge by history.
That's true. I mean, probably the ordinary Turkish people in the street is thinking that way. I mean, the story, you know, we are within inside story. The story we are dealing with now is not that simple. It's quite a complex story. First of all, it's not about the AKP only, or it's not about the only governing party today, Turkey. It's more than that. People are, I mean, roughly half of the Turkish people are worried that there is a religious sect for about 40 years have been trying to infiltrate into state, planting their followers in critical positions and making use of the weaknesses of the democratic regime, in a sense, taking the whole system under control, focusing mainly in police, in Ministry of Internal Affairs, and Ministry of Education, all critical positions. So this is a religious-based sect. So people are worried that gradually the Turkish democracy is being reduced into an electoral democracy. It's not about concern only about secularism. It's about the future of Turkish democracy, the transition and consolidation of democracy in Turkey. People are really worried because, first of all, democracy is based on checks and balances. The problem in Turkey, the real problem, the concrete problem is that the checks and balances system in Turkey is gradually disappearing. That's the problem. That's where the threat is, as perceived by millions of Turks.
Okay, so Haldun Öztürk says it's not just about AK Party or this government, it's about, 40 years of religion creeping in. Abdul, Hamid in Istanbul, what I would say to that, and I want to get your view on this, is that the government is the one in power now, the government is the one to do something about it. Does it not fall to them to fix this in some way or the other, or to allay the fears of the public?
I guess those kind of concerns are legitimate as far as they try to find their place in a democratic atmosphere. I mean, they can freely found their own political parties, and they can found their civil society organizations, and they can compete in a democratic environment. And they can join the elections and see the result. So if you are plotting democracy in the name of protecting democracy, it's a kind of smearing propaganda. So that is what Turkish people are fed up and getting fed up more and more. So if we are serious and sincere about democracy, it is not the business of a colonel in the army to try to write a document that would at the end discredit the political party, ruling party, the government itself, and one of the very important civil society organizations, which is called Gülen movement. You know what is written in the details of that document? They say that in terms of Turkish democracy and in terms of Turkish judicial system, they are not able to do something against the government, ruling AK Party, and against that movement. And they offer in that document to put some ammunition and to put some guns into the houses that are used by the students that are affiliated with that movement, with the Gülen movement, and then capture them and then claim that these people are terrorist people, and then to bring them to the military courts to sue those people and to discredit that movement. So, I mean, is this a legitimate way of struggling in a democratic society?
Let me just interrupt you, because
people are afraid.
I'll get a quick response from Haldun Öztürk because he's shaking his head there in Izmir, and I want to know why.
In its military principle, the best offense, the best defense is offense. And I understand that it has been adopted by some civilians as well. I told at the beginning, the plan itself, the rhetoric, everything, if it is true or not, I mean, it's regardless of that, it's a stupid idea. But if somebody calls the Gülen movement as a civil society organization, I would take this as an insult to my intellectual ability. I mean, no civil society, as it's understood, internationally in the universal terminology, is not based on a religious hierarchy, based on unconditional, obedience. What kind of civil society is that? I mean, what are you talking about?
Let's get some thoughts from Fadi Hakour, who's waiting, of course, in London. I'd like to bring him back into the conversation and I guess look to the future because, as I said, AK Party's been in power for 7 years and yet this still goes on and it continues to go on. And as some of our guests have pointed out, it goes on because of perhaps the way religion is creeping into society there. What has AK Party, as the government, as the elected government of Turkey, what has it got to do to put a lid on this and to settle down the secularism debate once and for all?
What Turkey needs, and actually what the government should do, is go back to the reformist course, the reformist pro-European Union direction it adopted during its first term of government between 2002 and 2007. But I think increasingly the evidence appears that it's unlikely the government will revert to that course. It is increasingly adopting a more populist, a more statist, a more nationalist discourse, an attitude. One can see this whole essentially political theater, and I would call it a political theater, essentially, as part of trying to use confrontational divisive politics by the government to regroup its supporters and try to reduce its eroding popularity in Turkey. In the last local elections, for example, despite the government actually lost 9% of the vote in Turkey for the first time since it assumed power in 2002, and opinion polls indicate continued gradual erosion of the popularity of the AKP government. If they want to solve Turkey's problems, restore its popularity, they should go back to the pro-European Union, pro-reform tendencies they adopted during its first term of government.
Well, you've made a very good point and I'm glad you brought it up, and that is the pro-European side of things, or just the European side of things in general. Do you think all of what is happening and what continues to happen here in Turkey in this style is really harming any attempts and efforts to get into the European Union? Will the EU be looking at them and going, sorry, we don't want this?
This political theater does not do good service to Turkey. The European Union is becoming increasingly worried that the government is paying lip service to the European Union accession process, but actually doing nothing on reform. We see a lot of promises of political, economic and social reforms, but there is no evidence of that. So if the Turkish government does not really go back to its pro-reform tendencies that it adopted during its first term of government, when it really adopted a very impressive program of change, then I think the European Union will lose faith in the government, will lose faith in Turkey, and Turkey's course will become that much more bumpy for the future.
Gentlemen, I have a feeling that we're going to have this conversation a lot more over the next few years, and I'm sure we'll invite you back for it when we do. Haldan Solmaz-Türk in Izmir, Abdul Hamid Bilci in Istanbul, and also Fadi Hakour there in London. Gentlemen, great discussion. Thank you for your thoughts and for your time, and to you, our viewers, as always, thank you for joining us for Inside Story. You can send a comment on this show, suggestion for a future show. You can always do that. InsideStory@aljazeera.net is our email address. But for now, from the whole team, goodbye.